Welcome back to the Travel Rolly podcast. Thank you for joining. Obviously, we are sponsored by Royal Links Golf Tours. That's where we help you customize and plan your unforgettable golf vacation to the British Isles. Now's the time to start planning for 2025. So visit us at royallinksgolftours.com and we can help you get started. Today we have Scott Dickson. He is the owner of the Whisky Caddie in Scotland. Please enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Travel Royally podcast. Today, it's our pleasure to welcome to the podcast Scott Dickson. Scott lives in Edinburgh, and he owns the Whisky Caddie. So Scott offers customized private Scotch whiskey tastings across Scotland, and he has a tremendous experience in the spirits industry. He's represented Loch Lomond Group, Highland Spring, Macallan, Laphroaig, Ardmore, Glenrothes, Glen Scotia, and Highland Park Whiskies. So we're very excited to work with Scott. We're introducing him to virtually every guest that we can when they're in Scotland. So Scott, welcome to the Travel Royally podcast.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Really looking forward to this. Looking forward to having a chat and discussing what we do with you. It's been a pleasure working with you just over the last 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, before we went on the air, everyone, I was telling Scott that I get a lot of calls from people that want to try and sell me something and they don't stand out. They're like, basically they do the same thing that someone else does that I might already be using. But Scott's got a very unique offering and service that I know our guests are all going to love. So we plugged him into a lot of trips already. And you're looking at a millionaire there now, just based on what I've given him, or what we've given him.
That would be nice.
Yeah, from my mouth to God's ears, that'd be great for you. That'd be great. That'd mean that I'm a millionaire too, right? So that's great. But before we get to the whiskey, let's start with the most important question. Are you actually a golfer?
I play golf, Jeff. I'm sure you've heard that before. I play golf. I love golf. Started at a relatively young age. Once maybe snuck into single figures, but I'm now, I classify myself as a decent 15 handicapper. And actually, part of what I do now, hopefully I can try and play some more golf, fitting that in and around the whiskey tastings and the caddying that I do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, one thing that I didn't mention is that he's not only a whiskey caddy, but he's a golf caddy as well. You're at Dumbarnie and you're at Crail, correct?
Yes, I do both. Yeah, so I'm a member at Crail and caddy at Crail, and then I do some caddying at Dumbarnie as well, which is one of the cracking new courses in and around the St Andrews area.
Yeah, that group that I told you about that you're going to do the whiskey caddy experience for in Edinburgh, they're playing Dumbarnie. Like 2 or 3 days after they're with you. So you'll have maybe you can caddy them around whiskey and around the golf course.
If they've not had or seen enough of me, I'm sure they could request me specially, and we could work in carrying one of the bags for one of the groups. It'd be a pleasure.
Yeah. They're a wonderful a group. The wife in this group is a friend of mine from a company that I used to work at. So the next obvious question is, then how did you get into the whiskey business?
There's obviously a great love of whiskey, and always has been since we're allowed to drink whiskey in Scotland at 18 years old. Came through it through friends of mine that I used to actually play rugby with back in Edinburgh. And he was working for a spirits company, and I just happened to be looking for a new job at the time, and managed to get myself an interview. So started basically what we call on-trade sales. So visiting pubs, clubs, hotels, restaurants, trying to sell them brands. And at that time, very fortunate to be selling some great brands like Famous Grouse. You mentioned some of the other brands, Macallan, Highland Park, Ardmore. They were all in our portfolio with cognac, vodka, and some champagne. So that's how I got into spirits. That's 20 plus years ago now, and did that. Went from sales to marketing, and then joined a water company, which you mentioned, Highland Spring, for a year, and then figured that it's more fun talking about whiskey and it's more fun talking about spirits. So joined Loch Lomond Group and did another 9 to 10 years there as well, working in the spirits business.
Excellent. Well, you've been around whiskey. Well, you're obviously more than 18 now.
Just a bit.
Just a shade. And obviously you've tasted, I'm going to say, virtually every brand in Scotland. You understand how to taste it. But so what makes you good at what you do?
I think you've got to have some passion there. You've got to really enjoy whiskey and, want to find out new experiences. So whiskey is only made of three things. It's malted barley, water, and yeast. So there's only three things that can change. Therefore, it's the intrigue as to how you then distill that, how you then put it into casks, different styles of yeast. So it's that thirst for knowledge as well, and trying to find out as much as you can. And then there's obviously the backstories to certain whiskey brands that go back a long way. Whiskey's been around. So 1732 is the first licensed distillery, Little Mill over in Bowling on the Clyde, and just outside Glasgow. So whiskey was making, and went back further than that, obviously. We could get into an argument as to who made whiskey first. Was it the Egyptians with their distilling? Was it the Scots? I think we can safely say we were before the Irish. We're pretty confident on that one, I think. So,
and therefore before the Americans as well.
Yes, yeah. And you just added the E. That's all you really did.
Well, and we throw corn in there as well, which you don't use.
Yeah, a bit of corn, bit of maize and rye. Although we can do things with those now, but they're not allowed to be called single malt Scotch whiskey anyway. So That's one of the things. But yeah, I think I've had some great teachers in the past, some great distillers who have shared their knowledge, some great ambassadors who've taught me how to enjoy and basically now try and do what I'm doing now, which is taste and present whiskey and it's got to be a fun and approachable way, without getting too hung up on the details. It's about trying to find flavors you enjoy, and then challenge yourself every so often to try something new, something different, because there's lots of new distilleries and therefore lots of new surprises out there in terms of what you can get and enjoy.
You're kind of a whiskey sommelier, correct?
I guess you could call it that, yeah.
Well, you brought up the point that all we added as Americans to whiskey was the E. I don't think most people in the States realize that, in here in the States, we spell whiskey K-E-Y at the end, and in Scotland, it's just K-Y, and in Ireland, it's K-E-Y. So, but it raises the question, when I'm in Scotland, everyone just calls it whiskey. When you walk up to a bar, you say, hey, I'll have a whiskey. And in the States, people call it Scotch or Scotch whiskey. And I've heard you use the term Scotch whiskey. So, what's the proper verbiage there, and what do you prefer?
I think Scotch whiskey says it all. That's the really over-encompassing term for what we produce in Scotland. There's lots of rules and regulations involved in distilling in Scotland. Scotch Whisky Association, and everybody buys into that. Therefore, if you see Scotch whisky on a bottle, then you're getting proper Scotch whisky in that bottle. And there's only certain things you can do to make sure that it ends up being called that. So as I said, touched on earlier, so single malt Scotch whisky is from one distillery only. It has to be malted barley, yeast, and water. Then it has to be matured in oak for a minimum of 3 years in Scotland. And then it has to be bottled in Scotland to be called single malt Scotch whisky.
Right.
Blended Scotch is is the biggest category in terms of volume. So your blended Scotch are your Johnny Walkers, Chivas, lots of these big brands, especially they're huge over in the States.
Right.
And blended Scotch is you use a grain. So you're actually using wheat as your grain for making the initial spirit. So it doesn't have quite so much character and flavor. What you're then doing is you're using different single malts from lots of different distilleries to mix in the top, what's called top dressing, to give it that flavor and character. So therefore, blended Scotch can be really, really good because you can have some top distilleries, single malt distilleries, using their malts are getting used in that blended Scotch. And blend, the clue's a bit in the name, it's blended to make it sometimes more approachable, easier to drink than sometimes some single malts, which some people can find quite challenging, especially
Right.
at a higher alcohol strength. So blends, there's no fixed rule. If you drink Scotch whiskey, we're happy over here, But blended Scotch, that's the one you'd maybe mix with your sodas, ginger ales, cokes, more like that. Single malts, good for cocktails, but that's where you generally would maybe drink that. That's where you drink it with the water or over ice. But again, if you want to mix it, you can mix it. It's, you still can get some of the, as long as you're still picking up the taste and the flavor from the whiskey, because someone spent a lot of time developing that through the distillation process.
Right.
And then choosing the casks and then making sure that it tastes the same every time they put it in the bottle. Therefore, you don't want to be masking all these lovely flavors that are being created in this whole process and just drown it in Coke so you can't taste anything,
Right.
I think that's the biggest shame, is if you're drowning it to get rid of the taste. If you're using a mixer to complement the taste and so you enjoy it, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I've had some Scotch whiskey cocktails, like a rusty nail out on a golf course.
Yeah, yeah, rusty nail, that can be single malt or blended Scotch mixed with Drambuie, which is sort of sweeter liqueur.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can warm the cockles of your heart, as we say over here.
Exactly. It was a cold, wintry day, and we were drinking that out on the course. So you talked about there being, in a single malt whiskey, there's basically, well, I want to go back one thing. If you're in a Scottish bar, you would order a whiskey, it wouldn't throw them off, but you don't have to say Scotch whiskey. You just say whiskey and they know what you mean.
Yeah. If you say a whiskey and Coke, they're going to give you, most likely, they will give you a blended Scotch whiskey, which the three biggest blended Scotches over here. So you'll get a Famous Grouse, a Bell's, or possibly a White Mackay or a Highland Commissioner.
Right.
That's your big blended Scotches. Single malt, anybody asking for a single malt in a bar in Scotland, that should prompt the response from the bartender. Is there any specific single malt you like or particular flavors you like? In which case, I can give you a hand as to find something that you might enjoy, or if you want to try something different.
Yeah. I mean, my club in Northern Scotland, Murray Golf Club, they've got 65 different whiskeys, single malts.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
So they're appealing to most everyone who likes whiskey. So I want to go back though. You mentioned that Scotch whiskey is made with 3 ingredients. Can you talk about the process of how Scotch whiskey is actually made?
Yeah, sure. In its simplest term, you're taking this malted barley, you're crushing it down, you're adding water to it to start the process, and you sort of start the germination process. That's where you're heating it, and then you're putting it into, that's the starting point. You're creating what we call a wort. Next stage really is fermentation, and that's, within reason, that's the first stage where you can start to have some impact on the flavors that you can sometimes taste in different whiskies. So at the fermentation stage, you're adding the yeast, which is starting to create the alcohol. So the fermentation stage minimum is about 45 hours, up to about 56 is standard. Lots of distilleries, so the one I've just left just now, Loch Lomond, they do a very long fermentation, which adds a little bit different flavor and character into the fermentation before we get to distillation.
And distillation is where they are in the big copper kettles, for lack of a better term, correct? That's what people are most familiar with when they think of whiskey.
They think of making, so you get the fermentation. It can be stainless steel. Some of the really older distilleries will have pine, what I call pine washbacks, which are all pine. Some will say it adds flavor, some will say it doesn't make a difference. Usually the ones that have moved to stainless steel. but actually, you try to almost have as little influence at that stage as possible. Then you get into the wash still. So that's going into the wash still at about 8 or 9%. So it's a strong beer at that point, really. Wash still, you distill it in the wash still first. That'll get up to the mid-20s. Then it'll go into the spirit still, where that's where you're heating the liquid and you try to create the vapors coming off that, which will then come over what's called the lye arm. You condense those and they come off as clear spirit. And if you've been lucky enough to have a visit at a distillery, that's where you've got the little arm, you've got the liquid pouring out, and you've got the four shots, the heart of the run, then the feints. So that's the distiller's skill, is trying to pick the exact heart of the run where you're getting the best spirit possible coming off the stills. And again, depending on the types of stills you have, the ABV can go as high as 85%, sometimes a wee bit higher, but about 85, down to probably low 60s. But generally speaking, roundabout, you're looking for something roundabout, most will be about 65% ABV by volume.
So Scott, is that a triple distillation process?
Double distillation.
Double distillation. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So wash still and then the main still. So it's double distillation.
So when
the
it
Irish
comes
do
out,
triple distillation.
What's that?
So the Irish do the triple distillation.
Yeah, that's what they do in the States with whiskey, a bourbon here. But let me ask you, when it comes out of the final distillation, it's clear, right? So it gets its color from the cask.
The color all comes from the cask. So then, there's the distillers of the shape of the still can impact the type of liquid you're getting. So the bigger, the longer the still neck is, the lighter the vapors are that are coming over. So the lighter your new make spirit is. If it's a really big, fat, dumpy pot still with a short lye on, that'll give you much heavier compounds and heavier flavors coming over the top. So then it's really between the blender and the distiller is working out what best casks to use. So again, to be Scotch whiskey, it has to be an oak cask. So it can be American oak, European oak, doesn't matter. It just needs to be in an oak cask. And again, the different casks give you different flavors. So American oak is obviously generally ex-bourbon. So that's one of the great things. Thank you for great union legislation in the States, which means that you can only use a bourbon cask once. Therefore, there's lots of extras bourbon casks which are shipped over to us. I think they might change that a wee bit, certainly with the price of bourbon casks going up at the moment. So that's when bourbon casks became much more popular in the whiskey industry because of the plentiful supply, because they were only ever used once, therefore had to be made again. Keeps lots of coopers in jobs in the States who make the casks.
Exactly.
So that's, and then a lot of the other ones is European oak, which not traditionally, but most people think of Spanish oak, and therefore seasoned with sherry. So that's where a lot of the sherry casks come from, is the oak bodegas in Spain and the big forest in Spain. And the American oak grows tall and straight. So you got a much tighter grain in the American oak. European oak trees grow with a bit of a kink and a bend, so therefore they've got a bit more of an open what's the word? Open. What did I say previously there?
Open pores, maybe.
Open grain. That's the word. Open grain. So that the liquid can move in and out of these living beings, which is the cask once the liquid's put in. So those casks, they will help give you the color. They'll add the color over time. Never 100% guaranteed. Sherry casks, again, general rule, a sherry cask will be darker than a bourbon cask when you take the liquid out, but not always.
Yeah.
American oak, that gives you citrus, vanilla, some toffees and caramels. And then the sherry oak generally gives you more red fruits. So you'll get much more sort of your apple, raisins, black currants will come from a sherry oak cask.
Yeah.
So that's and that it has to be a minimum of 3 years in the cask for it to be called Scotch whiskey and single malt Scotch whiskey. And then, as you know, most malt whiskies are not bottled till at least probably about 8 years old these days. But there is some really nice young single malt out there because people are getting better at the fermentation and they get better at the distillation. So
Well, I'll
your
tell you, I
casks.
think I've tasted, I was telling you how much I enjoy Edredauer, which is
Yeah.
a small distillery in Scotland for those who are unfamiliar. And they've got a wonderful 10-year-old that I know a lot of people look down because it's not 12 or 15 or 18 or whatever, but it's a very lovely 10-year-old.
As we all know, especially when you get to my age, etc., age is just a number. What you get is completely, it's age is important, and actually, we could argue that from marketing points of view, certainly through 70s, 80s into the 90s, age was everything. It had to be. If it wasn't aged, you didn't touch it. As you say, generally starting at 10, 12, 15, 20, 25. Nowadays, as I say, with different casking options, so putting it in two different styles of cask can add that flavor and character a lot quicker. Therefore, some younger whiskies really do have some great character, and it can depend a lot on your palate as well. I'll be honest enough to say that I love one of my favorite whiskies used to be a Highland Park 21-year-old. The 18 is the one that won all the awards in the world, was the most prestigious for Highland Park.
Yeah.
But actually, I prefer the 21 because it had a bit more American oak flavor to it. And that's just one of these things. It just comes down to personal preference. So
Right.
you saying you like a 10-year-old, that's because your palate likes it, you enjoy it. Sometimes if you get too much going on in a whiskey, you don't know what to do. You just kind of get a bit confused.
Right.
Whereas actually sometimes a younger, simpler whiskey, crikey, that's really enjoyable. And
Right.
again, the last thing I'll say on that is whiskey's about drinking a whiskey sometimes about who you're with, where you are, and what you're doing. And the type of whiskey you're drinking at that point in time sometimes can be very fits that dynamic of what you're doing. So, freezing cold day on the Scottish links, you get back in, the hotel's got the fire on, you're sitting beside a nice big log fire, and you just want to get a bit of warmth in. That's when a slightly heavier whiskey with a bit of peat in there just really hits the spot, you know?
Got
But
it.
if you're lucky enough in St Andrews when it's lovely and the sun is shining, you might want a slightly lighter whiskey to enjoy, and just
Yeah, the
what
King's
fits with
Barnes,
sunshine and what you do.
the new
Yeah,
King's Barnes distilleries, they produce what I would call a light whiskey, right?
they do. I mean, just a wee plug for Crail. So and caddying at Crail, you get a nice little pouch of Balcomy from King's Barnes in your little welcome box when you tee off.
Excellent. Well, and at Dumbarnie, where you caddy, they've got you get a
They've
shot of
got
whiskey on the first tee, which is a lovely touch.
You do. That's actually the old business I worked for before was the Loch Lomond. So we worked with David Scott there to do the sampling on the tea, and it's something they've embraced actually, which is great to
Right.
see. And it's just everybody turns up now. They used to do it special occasions, and they also we certainly supplied or helped them with. If you get a hole in one in any of the holes on the par threes anyway, you get a nice bottle of Loch Lomond as well as the pin flag. So they've really embraced that whiskey and golf going together nicely, which is good.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. We had David Scott on the podcast about 6 weeks ago, I think.
Ah, brilliant.
So, well, I'll tell you what, one of the things I really enjoyed when I first started drinking scotch, we were at a tasting, a friend and we weren't huge fans of scotch. And it's over 20 years ago. And we were on the Royal Mile where they've got like all those shops, and they were having a tasting.
Yep.
And when we went in, and it was a blind tasting, and it was just to see what's your preference. And my buddy, who's got a fair amount of money, said, "I like that one." And he goes, "I guarantee you, it's going to be the most expensive one." Sure enough, it was a 18-year-old Glenfiddich finished in Cuban rum cast, and it was called
Nice.
Havana Reserve, and it was
Yeah.
excellent. We both loved it. And what happened was they wouldn't allow it to be imported after a while into the States because of the Cuban connection.
The Cuban rum connection.
So they changed the name to Grand Reserva, and then you were able to get it again. I don't think they make it anymore. But to your point, they're using Portuguese port cast, Spanish sherry casks, French wine casks, Cuban rum cask, American bourbon casks. And it's all in search of a distinct flavor that'll appeal to the palates of whoever they're trying to go after.
And that's it. It can be certainly a rum cask will always give you a little bit of a sweeter overtone to a whiskey, which if you've been drinking bourbon, for instance, because bourbon as a general rule is much sweeter than Scotch whiskey. So therefore, if you're looking for something that's a bit sweeter and a bit lighter, as you say, finishing an 18-year-old, especially if it's been a sherry cask or American oak, adding a rum cask finish to it would be lovely because it just adds a little bit of, and that's what I was saying right at the start. You might say, I don't like this distillery. I've had that and I don't like it. The point is, 2 years later, they'll bring out a new edition and finished it in a different cask.
Right.
And it might be something that just piques your interest and, it's really worth trying. I don't want to name any brand. There's a couple of whiskeys I always say, and I don't really like them. But you go to a whiskey show or you get the opportunity, and that's the beauty of being in the trade. You go to whiskey shows and every distiller has always got something under the table or something a bit special.
Right.
So you get to taste different whiskeys because you go, if you got anything a bit, well, try this one. And the one, the brand I won't mention, but yeah, there was a rum, and fun enough, it was a rum cask finish. And I thought, actually, I would drink that. I wouldn't touch your sort of standard.
Right.
That rum cask finish was gorgeous,
Yeah.
And that's, as I said, that's the beauty. Because we've only got these three ingredients, one of the ways to experiment is using different styles of casks, which you named there. And that's what can give these different flavor profiles.
Right.
So there's always something new that you can come and explore in Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, I think I want to shift to flavor profiles, and you mentioned some of them that come from the different casks, whether it's black currant or strawberry, raspberry, banana, some of these different flavor profiles. But in sweeter notes and so forth. But there's also, not only does flavor come from that, but through malting the barley, some people do that with peat, and that creates more of a smoky flavor, or in the States we call it peaty. It tastes or smells peaty. And that tends to be more on the outer islands. Am I correct? Like Islay, whiskeys from Islay is an example. That's
an example, yeah. Islay's got this reputation for the bigger, heavier, as you say, what we call peated whiskies. And that's just, it's the whole thing about terroir. Over there, they've got the peat on the island. Back when distilling was first starting, what did you have? You have to dry the malted barley at some point once it's been soaked to start that germination process.
Right.
Therefore, what did you have? You had peat. So peat is vegetative material that's died and been compressed into the ground over 6,000 to 10,000 years. And then it gets dug up again, and then it gets dried, and then you burn it, and it gives us, very different, a very smoky, but different smoky note that you would get from coal or anything like that.
Right.
And that they put the malted barley above that, fire underneath with the peat smoke, which goes through the malted barley and infuses into that malted barley while it dries. And then that's where that peat smoke comes from. So to dispel any myths, it doesn't come from the water. It doesn't come from anything else. It's this drying process. So some distilleries do have this, what's called floor maltings, where the barley's all laid out on the floor and it's turned, and then it's dried with the peat from its area. So Lefroy on Islay, for instance, they use their own Bowmore, Highland Park, which is away up most north of in Orkney, which is just off the north coast of Scotland. They've got their own peat there, which is again very unique to Highland Park because the island is very exposed. It blows a gale, very temperate climate. Your average temperature is about 15 degrees. Never really gets below freezing. Also never gets much above about 18. But they've got, so all their vegetative matter is all heather and just grass. There's no wood in it, no nut. So it's got a very different smoky. So I could go around every part of Scotland's almost got different styles of peat, is what I'm saying. So there's never, again, one style of peat. There's different styles of peat. So if someone says it's a heavily peated whiskey, just don't go, I don't do peated whiskey. It could be a very different style of heavily peated whiskey, And that's the beauty of going to tastings or trying, is just trying to find out and enjoy it, I think Lefroy to me is still the quintessential Islay peated whiskey, but this is Loch Lomond here. Loch Lomond, they do 3 12-year-olds. This one here is what they call the perfectly balanced one, which is using unpeated and peated liquid. So the peat smoke is there, but it's not particularly prevalent. We do another one, which is Loch Lomond 12-inch Moan, which is 3 styles of spirit, but they're all heavily peated. So again, the peat's there, but the balance is also incredible. So although it's the same peat level as a Lefroy, you wouldn't nose and taste it like a Lefroy. It's very different.
Right.
So I guess the message is, don't be scared when someone says this is a heavily peated whiskey. It might be worth it giving it a go. See what you find.
Right. Now, you said that those Loch Lomond's, are those single malt or are those blended whiskeys?
All single malt, yeah.
Okay.
Because they distill 9 different spirit styles. So with those 9 different spirit styles, they can combine them in lots of different ways to create lots of different flavor styles.
Right.
And they do the extra long fermentation. So there's always an underlying fruity element to the spirit. This one here, the 12 there, is perfectly balanced. So you've got 3 unpeated whiskies and 1 peated. So it's just quite gentle in the nose, and there's a lovely warming note on the finish. The 12-year-old Inch Moan is much more peaty, because it's still, you talk about peat levels as parts per million. So Lefroy's 50. These are also 50 parts per million. But because of the way the fermentation works and the distillation, it softens it all down quite a lot. So it's still there and gives a lovely peat finish.
Yeah.
And then they do one which is just called Inchmurren, which is the kind of almost the single spirit that Loch Lomond is kind of renowned for, which is quite light and fruity. But with those other 8 styles, the master blender can bring them together. And as long as they're all from one distillery, it's still single malt. So a lot of distilleries will distill maybe 3 types of spirit. Jeff, they'll do what they would call as their distillery style spirit. They might do a light peated and a heavy peated as well, to give them just that variety as they go forward.
Excellent. Now, I've got a question, because obviously you've tasted a lot of whiskey and you lead people through tastings. What's the proper way to do a whiskey tasting, or to taste whiskey and understand whether your palate really does appreciate what you're tasting?
I've got the wee glass here, so I'll do a wee tasting and
oh my goodness, here we go. As
quickly as I can. Ultimately, the first thing you should really do, as I said, talked about, is the color of the whiskey. So you can have a wee look at the color of the whiskey, and that should give you an indication to start off to, is whether or not that's potentially a sherry cask or potentially a bourbon cask. Now, the one thing we are allowed to add in the Scotch whisky industry is caramel, to give it a little bit of extra color. So sometimes the color is not the only thing that you're looking for, but it's a nice starting point to give you an idea. So you're taking your whiskey, you're having a good look at it. It's just pretty light in color. It's not particularly dark. So you take a stab at that's going to be American oak casks,
Okay.
Then the next bit is you're looking to do the nosing. But again, you don't want to stick your nose straight in. You want to start it off a little bit lower down, a little bit further up, and then get your nose in. Because ultimately this is 46% here. You've got 40% or above alcohol. If you just put it straight in, you're sort of damaging and burning your nose straight off, and you'll lose any impact that you might get as you move down the tasting. So it's always a good idea just to do it 3 times, and therefore you can then pick up, is there peat in there? So you should be able to pick up peat notes. And again, American oak casks, you're looking for that citrus, so maybe some apples or pears or oranges. And then, as I say, just in this one, it's quite a nice little bit of gentle peat smoke and just in the background. And then it just comes to, just as we say, Slàinte mhath, and you do the most important bit, which is tasting it. So again, with that, you're generally just trying to coat your mouth, coat your tongue, swallow it down, and then just pick up what you get in the finish here. You get this lovely smoky note on the back of the finish.
Yeah.
After that, that should give you a good idea. So I think first thing first, if possible, is always try it neat as to what you're given, but always try and keep a little bit back, and then you can add a little bit of water, because what adding little bits of water will help the nose and the palate just expand and come to life in the glass.
Okay.
And
when you nose it, should you? I've been told you need to keep your mouth open.
if you can keep your mouth open, that's good. It's harder than you think, actually.
Yeah.
You automatically shut your mouth when you. But yeah, if you can keep your mouth open, that does help. Just helps bring everything through.
For your favorite whiskeys, what makes them your favorite? Meaning, what makes for a great tasting whiskey in your mind, for you personally?
For me personally, I think over all these years, I generally think, and I say think because I can always be persuaded otherwise. I prefer an American oak cask. I quite like citrus, the vanilla element to some malt. And actually, I like a little bit of balance where you get a bit of peat smoke, as an everyday go-to type single malt to drink. So that's why this of the three Loch Lomans, this is my favorite, just because it's got a lovely balance. And I think if you can get a whiskey that's got a great balance to it, and this is obviously relatively complex because the master blenders brought 4 spirit styles together. So you've got these 4 spirit styles all intermingling within the glass. That's why a little bit of water can just help some of those explode and come to life. So I'm looking for something that's going to give me. And then the other bit is this is higher strength, 46%. 40% is fine. 43 is good. It depends on the spirit, but the higher ABV gives you a longer length of finish. So you want something that you've had a nice little mouthful. You've been sitting back, enjoy it, and go. And then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes, you can still get that taste in your mouth. And that's a sign of a good whiskey when it's got that great length of finish. That's a sign of good.
You mentioned that this Loch Lomond is a great everyday whiskey. You also said, hey, after a cold day on the links, you might want something that's a little more peated.
Yeah.
Let me ask this: for a special holiday like Christmas or New Year's, do you have a favorite for that? A favorite type for that type of year or type of celebration, if you will, or occasion?
I'll tell you, it's actually it's on the table behind you in your picture. I'm always going to lean towards distilleries I've worked with and know really well, but Glen Scotia Victoriana, it's got really good character, balance, and flavor, but it's what we call a no age statement, Jeff. So there's no age on the bottle. So you look at the bottle and go, why is this £75? It's not got an age on the bottle, but it does have some high quality aged liquid in there. It's also been finished in superb casks. And it's one of these ones where by not putting an age on it, it allows the distiller to pick the best casks possible to create this flavor. And the objective at the time was to try and recreate what a Victorian whiskey would be like back in Campbelltown days in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. So it's got great depth in it. And it's got this little bit of smokiness to it. And actually it's got that little hint of Christmas cake and almost creme caramel about it, because you've got some sherry casks involved. So that gives you that Christmassy cake sherry element. So that's a very Christmassy malt for me, it has to be said.
Yeah. I've also tried a single cask whiskey. Can you talk about the difference between a single cask whiskey and other whiskeys?
Yeah, well, as I say, when you're making a blend or when you're making a malt, a 12-year-old or whatever, you're bringing together lots of different casks. So it gives the blender the ability to bring, you could be doing a vatting of 40, 60, 80, 100 casks that you're bringing together to create that one bottling. And he's got a profile that he's looking for. Therefore, he's so many of those casks, so many of those, and so many of those. And then the skill is in bringing them together, which I still don't know how they do that. I'll be honest. Right. That's way beyond my capabilities. Whereas a single cask is the same liquid, or it's liquid from a distillery that's put in one cask and has lived its whole life in that one cask. You're then bottling it as just that one cask. So you're not mixing or blending it with another malt or another spirit from that distillery. It's lived its life in that cask. Therefore, it's actually one of the hardest things to make sure the single casks are quite rare in a way, because they have to be good, because they've got to stand up in their own right. They've not got the ability to be, blended together with another one to make it good. It's got to be stand out in its own right. So therefore, that's why single cask bottling, there's lots around, but they're generally more expensive because they are expensive casks that someone's nurtured and looked after. And again, depending on the age, you've got what's called the angel share, which is the evaporation of spirit over time. So when you're getting a single cask getting to 18 or 20 years old, the cask might have started with 300 plus bottles in there, but you're getting down to around about 200 to 180 bottles left in that cask. So there's less in single casks the older you get.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's going to have an impact on price.
Yeah.
So single cask, you've got to be, again, it's looking for single casks where you either know you've got a really good distiller and you know a little bit about the provenance of the distiller, that they make really good spirit, because it's really good spirit going into good wood is your best chance of having a great single cask.
Right.
The phrase of, crap in, crap out, it kind of works in whiskey as well to some extent,
Well, then let's move on to, I want to move on to the, in the States, it seems like a lot of people look down their noses at blended whiskeys. And you talked earlier about the difference between a single malt and a blended whiskey. In Scotland, does it have that same reputation that single malts are superior?
Yes, I think, and I'd say it's they're superior for what they're delivering in terms of, they are aged products. Most blended Scotch drunk at the lower level, certainly in Scotland and most of Europe, etc., out with the sort of bigger names that have age statements.
Right.
They're drunk at 3 to 4 years old. So, they've only spent 3 years in cask. They're made to be, nice and soft and balanced. Whereas this, single malt Scotch whisky is you're relying on that aging process. Therefore, you lose more liquid, all that side of it. But as I say, blended is great for mixed drinks, or some of the aged blends are really, really good, to be honest. Because again, it's, Diageo's got about, 20 plus 30 distilleries that they're picking and choosing malts from to go into the liquid they distill as grain to create Johnny Walker, there's a huge amount of skill and precision, and they've got distilleries that are just making malt to go into Johnny Walker, So they shouldn't be sniffed at all. It's like, I think some are better than others. There's definitely more kudos in a single malt. There's no doubt about it. I think you'll get longer lasting flavor, longer lasting character. I'm talking about that finish on your palate. If you've got, you're still tasting that single malt 10 minutes later.
Right.
Because if you've got a blend and you're mixing it, you're enjoying it, you're getting a taste of whiskey, but you're not getting that length of finish and character that you can get in single malts.
Excellent. Well, we've been talking for about 45 minutes, and my guess is that what we've done is very similar to what you would do in a tasting experience, correct?
Yep, except everyone would be drinking a lot more than we are.
Hey, it's only noon here, a little before, so I didn't have any whiskey to drink, although I kind of promised you that I would, but I've got other things to do today. But I want to move to your company now because we're so excited to work with you. But what led you to start the Whisky Caddie?
Well, at my last job at Loch Lomond were the official Spirit of the Open Championship. So, and the Women's Open as well, and the Ladies Scottish Open. So from starting in at Loch Lomond back in 2015, heavily involved with golf and doing golf events. And I love my golf, so that's great. And I like my whiskey, which is brilliant. And then ultimately, as you can see, I'm, no spring chicken. And it was we delivered the 150th Open at St Andrews, which was absolutely phenomenal. And Loch Lomond is a great business; it's going places. But it was just one of these things. It's like I recognised the number of people in and around St Andrews were going, "Could you coming to us as a brand? Going, could you do whiskey tastings for us?" And you just don't have the time. You can't. It's not. Even if it's an ambassador's job or somebody's job, there's just never the time to be able to do that.
Right.
In the big when you're working for a bigger corporate. So I basically just identified the fact that there's an opportunity here in St Andrews, especially in and around that area, to target golfers that are coming in for 3 or 4 days. That I go on golf tours with the boys. You're getting picked up, you're getting dropped off for golf, you're getting picked up, you're going out for dinner. There's not a huge amount of time. So I figured there's an opportunity for what I'm doing, which is bespoke whiskey tastings. I'll come to you with everything you need. So I'll bring the whiskey, I'll bring the glassware, everything you need to be able to have a whiskey tasting. And I can do it pretty much wherever you want as well. So for yourself, Jeff, I think we've got a mixture of hotels, bed and breakfasts, and and private houses. Therefore, I can turn up and then give you this nice hour and a quarter at that nice little lull, probably when you just got off the course, you're showering, you're getting ready, and you want to go out for dinner. And let's just get that nice little sweet spot there and do a nice whiskey tasting. So I thought, yeah, let's, why not? You've only got to try it and give it a go. And, the reaction has been, everyone's like, we should be doing it. I probably started at the wrong time last year, which is in the middle of the summer when everybody's booked their trips. And we're in the middle probably of the biggest tourist season, certainly in and around St Andrews, and the biggest golfer influx since COVID. Because even during the 150th, a lot of people don't travel that year because the Open's on, therefore you can't play, certainly in and around St Andrews, you can't play St Andrews because it's closed for so much of the time. So yeah, I love my previous job, but I thought, no, an opportunity to go back and do something again for myself. It involves my two loves of whiskey and golf. And I say, really enjoyed the caddying. Everyone I spoke to when we're going round saying, would you guys like to do a whiskey tasting? Yeah, we'd love to. So kind of just that affirmation that there was a need or desire from people to have a whiskey tasting when they were over here. So yeah, I thought I'll give that a go and I can see me hopefully doing both for quite a number of years to come,
Yeah.
And either scale it up or scale it down, depending on where we get to.
Well, I think it's a fantastic service that you provide. And, you mentioned that you do these basically wherever, but the point that I want to make is that they're private, right? And meaning that you bring in 6 different whiskeys for everyone to taste. You go through exactly what you went through with you, what you and I have gone through. I know you'll do some other things, but it's typical of what you would talk about. So it's private, it's bespoke, it's very interactive, as you've seen with you and I today, very interactive. And it's different than going to a distillery where you get to taste their whiskeys their way. With you, you're tasting multiple whiskeys with different flavor profiles from different distilleries. So I think that's just brilliant.
Just saying sorry, Jeff, for people in the background now, you've got the picture there of Scotland. So the tasting that's sort of represented there is there's 5 regions of Scotland classified as whiskey regions. So I pick a whiskey from each of those regions, and not just because it's in a different region, but it also gives me the opportunity to tell a story about how to make whiskey without doing the PowerPoint or the whatever about this is what we do next. Each one has a different unique element. So you sort of mentioned the peat bit when we're talking about making whiskey, which I didn't talk about when we're making whiskey, but it's it's a big question. But the point is, when we taste a Lafroig, I'll tell you where that peat comes from and how you get that influence of the peat. One of them is a single cask. So again, this is a single cask, therefore it's unique because it's a single cask. One's peat. I've got a variety of sherry casks, American bourbon casks, and then, as I say, I did a little. I'll do you a surprise dram when you arrive, and then once you've done the overall tasting, you can have a discussion amongst yourselves or with me as to what you think that was, because it's something to your point, it can throw people a little bit, and again, it's about having fun. Not everybody will necessarily like every whiskey I'm going to ask them to taste, but hopefully I can do it in an engaging way, by talking about flavors and tastes rather than focusing on this is the process of the distilling. That's it's a big element, don't get me wrong, but actually it's about the resultant flavors and taste that you get coming out of whiskey and the variety that's out there for people to enjoy.
Yeah. I think I'm very excited to hear our guests come back and tell us what they thought about the tastings. Now, another question I've got, Scott, is do you have a standard group of whiskeys that you use, or do you vary it based on the time of year, the temperature, like we talked, or and can they request their own whiskeys that they'd like to taste?
Yes, absolutely, Jeff. That's part of, again, what I want to try and say and do to people is, if you've got any special requests, if I can source it and get it, I will do. I'm working for a bottling company at the moment, so we actually bottle a lot of single casks for people. So I'm hoping through that I can get the opportunity to have some more single casks for people to try, because that's really unusual.
Yeah.
What we're talking about there is the ones on the table there behind that is doing that regional thing, but I will vary that as new whiskies appear, different finishes or different additions appear. I chose, there's a Lochlear there on the table behind you, and it's a lowland whiskey, and I thought, oh, it's a new lowland whiskey. They've only been around since 2017, I think, but I know the distiller really well from where he worked before. Therefore, I thought that, yeah. So there's a bit of connection there.
Yeah.
Very high caliber. It's what's called small batch, so it's only quite a small number of bottles bottling. So it's about just mixing them up. What I don't want to do is go, right, these are the top 10 whiskies in Scotland. Let's just give you those.
Right. Yeah, I like that approach very much. I mean, I love the way that you're doing that, and I'm very jealous that you're drinking whiskey in front of me.
I'm sipping, Jeff.
Sipping. You're just tasting.
Yeah. So there's the two things. That's what I would call as I say, the regional tasting. I can do a category tasting. So that's single grain, blended, single malt, blended malt, single cask. So that's another way of doing it as well. So, and I'll probably have bottles of bits in a car or whatever. So we can always, folk are enjoying themselves. I can go and get something. It's that. Yeah. That's the kind of opportunity that we want to have. People are loving it. Generally speaking, as I say, I think they're always going to be slightly tight on time. They're going to be going for dinner or whatever. But we can generally, the tastings will take an hour and a quarter. That's enough to do 6 whiskies, have a good time, enjoy it, and send people off for hopefully a nice dinner wherever they're staying.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to shift gears now. We've talked for an hour now about whiskey. And I want people to know that sincerely, this is an experience you don't want to miss while you're in Scotland. It's a huge part of the culture and the fabric of the country. And to not do something like this would be a massive mistake. So as I said at the outset, Scott, we're eager to send all of our clients to be with you and can't wait for that. But as we shift gears back to golf, what's your favorite golf course in Scotland?
You said Scotland there, because funnily enough, I was thinking about that today.
Well, let's do both. Your favorite golf course.
So I'll do Scotland. I'll do Scotland first. Got to be careful here. I'm going to stick with Dunbarney, actually. Since they've opened there, and there's 2 reasons, maybe 3 reasons for choosing Dunbarney. I've played it off different tees, and it gives you a completely different experience, which I think is great. So therefore, weather or ability, you can mix and match on that. The fairways are like carpets. The greens last summer certainly were superb.
Yeah.
The welcome, the whiskey on the tee, and I think just every hole is on its own. So you kind of feel really cocooned that you're on Dunbarney on your own. You're not, and that's slightly against my home course of Crail. When you're going up that middle stretch of Crail, you know what it's like, Jeff. It's put the helmet on and shout four. You know, it can be a little bit hairy at times. Great golf course to play Crail, and they're at the opposite ends of the spectrum of links golf in Scotland. I think you've got that James Braid 5/8 off the back sticks, but with the wind blowing, very tricky, and sort of classical design to something that's, purpose built, but has a links feel about it, different directions with the wind, and just I think it just tees up beautifully, and as I say, it's lucky enough last year to caddy for people as beginners and +4 handicappers, and depending on what tee you're off, you can really even the whole thing out and have a really great day there. But my overseas is one is Penalonga in Portugal, which is near Estoril.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't played it.
It's just I think I've played it 3 times, and it's just I would go back in a heartbeat again. I think it's just a gorgeous golf course.
Hey, but I didn't think about this until now, but as a caddy, have you caddied for anyone famous?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And you haven't. Oh, never mind. Okay. Last question. No, go ahead.
That's the goal in the caddying this year. Hopefully, with a few contacts, the women's Open is at St Andrews this year, the AIG Women's Open.
Right.
Final qualifying is at Crail on the Monday. So I put the word out to a few people I know that I'm looking for a bag for that. If any of the players fancy me for a day, I'll take a bag on that. So I'd love to do that. Then they qualify, then I can maybe get to do St Andrews for 4 days.
Wow, that'd be special, wouldn't it? That'd be. Yeah. So what advice, this is the last question, what advice do you have for people that are visiting Scotland for the first time, like many of our guests, both from a golf perspective and just as a visitor to Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and actually one of the things that attracted me to put that little note on your post to approach you for what I was doing was the fact that I like the fact that you're taking people on you're doing an educational as well as a golf tour.
Right.
So, from my point of view, it's weird when I go on my golf tours with the boys, it's generally in Europe. You see a very specific part of a town and bars and restaurants, and you don't indulge yourself in the culture. And then I'll go back with my wife and the children, and it's like, she goes, "Have you never been here?" I said, "No, never been to this bit of the town before at all," because you tend to focus on certain areas,
Right.
So I think, if possible, taking the time to visit and just try and indulge yourself in a little bit of culture of Scotland, whether that be in Edinburgh, Glasgow, St Andrews, or whatever. It's just try and find some time to go and do something that's not golf when you're here. Right. I think that's you've got that involved in your tours, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. And then from a golf point of view, just be prepared. It's funny, some guys, they come over, and girls as well, and they've bought waterproof specially, and they get annoyed because it doesn't rain, and they get gorgeous weather when they're there. So it's just, you've been over often enough, Jeff, to know that it could be blowing a gale and throwing it down rain one day, and the next day it's as quiet as a mouse, and the sun is shining, and it's 22 degrees.
Yeah.
You just got, when it comes to the golf, you just got to be prepared for everything. Top tip, go to your pro and learn how to play a pitch and run.
Yeah, I think what he's referring to is that you don't want to hit a high ball over there, and if you're around the green, you want to bump and run it, keep the ball on the ground or get it on the ground as quickly as possible. Right.
60-degree lob wedge shots into greens when it's 20 miles an hour wind.
Not only that, but hitting it off such a tight fairway.
Lie as well is hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still take my 60. Well, I have a 58 degree, but I take it for playing out of those deep, revetted bunkers.
I wouldn't say bring any specific clubs. You need it for the bunkers, or you need it to get out of some rough. Sometimes you've got to come over bunkers. It just depends when you lie. But it's that kind of 20 to 30 yard shot out that a lot of golf courses and links courses in Scotland, certainly, you can just play that along the ground and take out a lot of the damage that you could do by a either thinning it or, knocking it in a greenside bunker and just play it along the ground.
Yeah.
With a 7-iron or an 8-iron. You don't even have to, it's not using wedges, even nines. 7
Yeah.
and 8 irons, and just play it almost like a stiff putter and just
Yeah.
keep it under the wind and get it running.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Travel Royally podcast. Sincerely, we appreciate your investing your time with us, and we're looking forward to doing a lot of business with you.
No, Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. As I say, hopefully, certainly see a lot of your guests this year, which I'm really looking forward to. And as I say, with the weather it is just now here, looking forward to the courses will open up in April. Get out, get the bag back on the back, and hopefully meet some more great people as they come over and enjoy themselves over in Scotland golfing.
Absolutely. We'll send plenty your way. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you again to Scott Dickson for coming on and sharing some info about his company and about living in Edinburgh. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share and subscribe so you know when the next video drops. Thank you so much.